Today we'll be replacing the radiator and the timing belt on my 1999 Subaru Forester with the 2.5 liter motor. This process is very similar for mostly all Subarus of this era using the EJ25 motor. And I think from 98 to like 2002, the radiator replacement is going to be almost exactly the same if you have a manual transmission. That's the only caveat. As you saw in my last video, this thing got pretty hot. And this radiator is separated from here. The plastic is separated from the metal there. So we have a new replacement one over there along with some nice goodies that we're going to toss in here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a jack under here and bring this up a little higher because we're going to need to access some stuff underneath the car, including the lower radiator hose. Underneath there, there's a jack point, which is that guy right there. Never jack your car up by the oil pan. And we're not going crazy high because just enough to get yourself comfortable under there. And then you've got over here this little pinch weld there. That's where you're going to set down your jack, or your jack stand rather. And do the same for the other side and gently lower the car down. From underneath the car, you're going to need to take off the lower radiator hose. If you've got clamps like mine, a flathead screwdriver will do the job. So if your car still has coolant in it like mine does, make sure you got a drip pan or something to collect all the coolant in there. And normally what I do is I'll just take this part of the hose off and move it away, and we're going to do the same up at the top very shortly. So there's no need to take it off of here. You can if you want for the extra room. I should mention you should do this when the car is cold, not when the coolant's hot. You don't want to burn yourself. And the coolant's going to come rushing out like that, and it may make some chainsaw noises like you hear in the background, but if it doesn't, that's alright too. While that's draining at the bottom, we're going to come up to the top and we're going to take this radiator hose off as well. And if you want the flow to go a little faster, you can open up the radiator cap here. That will allow more air to come in and be able to flow a lot easier. However, mine's cracked all along here, so that won't make a difference for me. So this one comes off just like the bottom one. This screwdriver happens to have the perfect size for this. I don't know the socket size. Looks like maybe a 9mm or something. But again, a flathead will do fine. I believe the stock you can use a screwdriver on as well. These are aftermarket clamps. So now that those hoses are out of the way, what we can do is we can begin to work on these guys here. These bolts, I believe, are 12mm. And we will start taking these off now. So if your bolts are a little rusty like these have been recently taken off, but it's always a good idea to use some PB Blaster on there or some WD-40, something to get your nuts a little looser, because nobody likes dealing with stiff nuts. So under here again, there's just two little captive grommets or something for plastic ends that go into the radiator. So you don't actually have to come up underneath here unless they're like really stuck. You can usually get away with just pulling the radiator up. Once those bolts are loose, that is like the only thing besides the radiator fans. What you need to do is you need to unclip these radiator fans, which are a little push style clip here. A little hard to get my camera in there, but you just push these clips up. And it's a little hard to do with one hand, so when you get down there, you'll see how these clips come apart. You just kind of like lift this little tab here and then you pull back on there, and you do the same for the other fan as well. When that is done, that's when you can lift the radiator up out from the top. Once those clips are out of place, what you can do is you can come over here. I apologize for the chainsaw noise. You can move these guys over to the side, or you can leave them exactly as they are, and then just straight up lift this guy out. You might have to wiggle a little bit. A little easier to do with two hands or a camera person. And then there's probably going to be some coolant left in here, so just be careful. Make sure you dump that out somewhere nice, like a river that accepts coolant, like your local hardware store or something. But dump out the rest of the coolant that's in there, which there's not very much in here. And then what I'm going to do right now is replace the timing belt as well. That's not required to do a radiator job. So what you can do is you can click the little card or here above here. That should bring you to the timestamp. If not, I don't know how to use YouTube, and the time stamps will be below where you can see how to put the radiator back in. So for the rest of the video is now, this is actually how you get to the timing belt. And to get to the timing belt, what we're gonna need to do is we're gonna take off these bolts here and there. So there's three total. And this little shroud comes up and off. And once that's off, make sure you store your bolts somewhere safe where the neighborhood children won't get them. They must never have access to this type of technology. All right, so what you're gonna do next is you're gonna have to release the tensioner for the for this belt here, which is gonna be a 12 millimeter here. You loosen this guy up first, and then you loosen this guy up next, which will make this belt come off a lot easier. And then right after that, I'm missing a tensioner thing here. I should probably get that replaced, but you can just loosen up this bottom pulley here, and then normally you can slide this pulley up and down with the tensioner. Mine unfortunately doesn't have that to show you, but those bolts, they basically come out. You don't have to touch these two. Actually, yeah, you do. You got to take this off. It's much easier to get the timing cover off. So you don't have to go crazy loose on this bolt, just enough where you can push the alternator down and get it loose enough to get the belt off, which for me it's going to be a little bit looser than that. And if the alternator won't go down, you can back off this bolt just a hair too, because that will be able to release a lot of pressure on the alternator itself. All right, when you get your belts off, just make sure you put them where you're not going to forget. They are different sizes, if I can remember correctly. I think this one's got the alternator. It's got more ribs on the belt than the air conditioner pulley does, so you can put those to the side. It will be kind of hard to mix them up, but again, alternator more ribs, non-alternator less ribs. Now that's out of the way, we're going to pop off these two bolts here, both 12 millimeters, and then we will have easier access to the timing cover. We're going to need to remove the crank pulley after that, which is not as hard as you think it would be. So one thing you want to do is you want to pull off the ignition coil wires here, there, or you could do them at each cylinder, whatever your preferred method is. That will stop the coil from firing and your car from starting. This engine turns clockwise this way if you're looking at it head on. So the idea here is you put a breaker bar in here, and ignore the fact that this is not a breaker bar because the one here is not long enough. So you put your 22 millimeter on here, you rest it on the body there, which it's probably going to break. If you have a longer breaker bar, you don't have anything to worry about. Then you go and you bump the starter real quick, which turns this real fast. This will keep the bolt in place. The bolt will loosen up, and you can take it out the rest of the way from there. So it's just going to be a quick bump on the starter, just to break that bolt free. Okay, so we're in here, and just going to do a little. All right, and that should have broken the bolt free. Let's go check. Okay, so this did scratch a little here. Not a big problem, not a show car. And the bolt, she is nice and loose. So we're going to pop that off, and then we're going to take this crank pulley off. I took this off pretty recently, just about a year ago, so this might be loose enough. Otherwise, sometimes you just got to hit it with a little rubber mallet, and I'll show you what that's like if it comes to that. Otherwise, I do think they do make a tool to pop these off, which I don't have, and I hope I don't need. So once the bolt's out, you can just kind of, hopefully you'll be able to wiggle yours out. I think I might have to just get the rubber mallet and give it a couple taps here, a couple taps there, or maybe the old meat claws can do it. Of course, sacrifice the old meat hooks when you have technology, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna give it a couple whacks. Actually, I'm gonna do this with the camera down because you don't want to drop this and end up breaking or cracking this, because the new ones are not cheap. So you're just gonna knock it loose a little bit. If it comes off that way, awesome, but make sure you can catch it. We got ourselves a winner here. And there we go. Now we have access to the timing cover, which is going to be a series of bolts. You have to take this side off first, and you just go around those. I believe they're 10 millimeters, all of them. And get them from the bottom as well. We'll take the timing cover off and see what the belt looks like. If your timing belt or cover was in as bad of shape as mine is, do yourself a favor and replace it. Don't not replace it. If you can, don't, because that's words. All right, so now that the thing is off, what we're going to do is we're going to put the crank bolt back in, and we're going to line up all the timing marks. There's one right here on the main crank pulley or cogged roller. I can't words today. And there's a paint mark here. and a little line here on the cover. And of course there's going to be the same over here, which the radiator hose is a little in the way of seeing, but on your own car you'll be able to see it pretty clearly. So once those marks are all lined up, we're going to make a note of where everything is, take a picture, and then we're going to release the tension on the tensioner to slide the belt off. Okay, so I've rotated the motor. The timing marks are all exactly where they need to be on the belt and on, or sorry, not on the belt, but on the cam gears and the crank gear itself. So to release the tension on the belt, we have to take the tensioner off, which is a 14mm bolt, this guy right here, and we're going to loosen that guy up, take this tensioner out, and then I'll show you how to recompress the piston in here, put a little grenade pin in there, and reinstall that right when we're about ready to put the new belt on. All right, so now that tensioner's out, we can go ahead and remove the belt. And you'll notice there's my new water pump. I don't know if I ever uploaded that video or not, but we're gonna slide this guy off, and always make sure you always take a picture of the belt routing. There are diagrams online, but it just helps if you don't want to pull up the manual and you just want to take a look at the last picture you had. So this guy just kind of comes out. Fortunately, the cams aren't turning, which is good. That does help. And this can be a little bit of a pain to get off here. Just kind of got to bring her up around there. Sometimes you have to just use two hands at the same time and slide this out. That's what I'm going to do exactly now. All right, now that you've got your belt out, compare it to your new one, make sure it looks about the same. If you really care that much, you can go and count all the ribs on it. I'm not. I'm just going to trust that I picked up the right one. And on these new belts, and most belts should have it too, you'll see these white markings here. They are to align the belt with the cams, the crank, and the cam. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put that back on soon, but first we're going to go and take care of the tensioner. I'll show you how to do that now. All right, so now, hey, look, there's a prototype for a product that I'm going to be releasing hopefully soon. Anyway, here is your tensioner. If you have a vise, it's definitely a lot more helpful. Don't really know of another way to really do this without one. So we have to compress this little piston here to basically line up with that little hole there. You'll see the two holes on yours as well. And when we compress it, we're going to go super, super slow, because you go too fast, you can blow out the seals in here and destroy your tensioner. Of course, if you can, new is always better, but not always possible. So this is the way to reuse yours. This one doesn't have too many miles. I think like 40,000 miles on it, and I didn't feel like spending the extra $100 and something for a new one. So we're going to pop this into the vise and start slowly compressing. And what I would say, for as short as it is, take a good minute to 2 minutes to really compress that down, just going a little bit at a time. I'm not going to film the whole thing just to save you guys some time, but when we get down to that last little bit where the holes line up, you can either use a grenade pin that's what they're called for these tensioner pins, or since I don't have any on hand, I'm just going to be using a small drill bit that'll fit in there. Okay, so you can see I was able to put the little drill bit through after about a minute and a half, just over a minute and a half of cranking that thing down very slowly. Now that that's through, we're going to back the vise off, and then we're going to leave it. The reason I would say use a drill bit and not something like a cotter pin is because the drill bits tend to be a lot harder, so they can take the pressure from the piston going up, whereas this might bend and you might end up breaking off a cotter pin or something while you're pulling it out of here, which you don't want to do, because then you're gonna have to repeat the process again. And you can just see, if this thing would focus for me, the drill bit is bending slightly, because again, there is some good pressure behind there. It shouldn't bend more than that, but if you can find a grenade pin, they sell them on Amazon. I'll link down below. That's what I would use for this instead of a drill bit. All right, so once you've got your tensioner pretty much back into place after you've put your pin in, we're going to torque it down to 29 foot-pounds. So, oh, seems like it's there already. Perfect. Okay, once that's torqued down, have your belt picture or diagram ready. and you can go ahead and start putting your belt back on. Okay, once your belt's back on, ignore the lack of marks on the belt right now. It's just because I've rotated the engine a couple times to make sure it was all correct. What we can do now is we can pull that little pin out, which in this case was just the thing. Once you verified everything is exactly where it needs to be and lining up perfectly, you can see my cams are in the right direction. This is all here and that is all there. So once that pin is pulled, your tension's back on your belt, and you can just double check that you've torqued down everything properly. All right, after that you can throw your timing cover back together. Hopefully, like I said before, it's in better shape than mine. That would be ideal for you. So I'm going to pull out the crank bolt again, which I was using to rotate the motor, and we're going to throw the harmonic balancer back on and torque that up. I'll give you guys the torque specs and how to do that, because obviously the motor is going to want to turn over. I'm going to show you how to stop that from happening. So online and a lot of other sources are saying that the crank bolt should be anywhere from 96 to 133 foot-pounds of torque, and that's a pretty big swing. I know for sure these can take 133 foot-pounds of torque because I did it on that last time, but I'm going to see how it holds up around 115 foot-pounds, kind of split the difference a little bit, and we'll see from there. I mean, if you know, put a comment below, or if I do find the manual for it or something, I will pin it and or have some overlay here so you guys don't go and mess up your motors. So always check the description first too. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put the car in 5th gear, have somebody apply the brakes down, and then we're going to tighten up the crank bolt, because having it in gear with the brakes on means the motor's not going to move. Once it's gone, it's basically locked to the transmission and then ultimately to the brakes, which are not going to move for the torque that we're putting on it. All right, and after you have somebody hold the brake and you make sure you're all tight, you can lock that person in your car.
No!
And hold on. Okay, now once you've trapped you, hey, you shouldn't, you've escaped.
Why?
There goes my career in acting. So what you're going to do now is you're going to put the belts back on, and we're going to put this bracket on first with that little pulley, which is just those two 12mm bolts. So if you're like me and you're too cheap to just replace that, or too lazy to replace that tension, or what I do, this isn't really great either. Just put a pry bar in there, put some weight on there, and tighten that bottom pulley up, and that's about how tight you want that belt. Pretty darn tight. And now next up, we're just gonna keep that at that tension where it is, and put the new belt, or same belt, back on for the alternator, and then tighten this bolt up and tighten that one up. I don't have torque specs on this bolt, but I just go pretty tight, and same with the belt, just so there's no slack in it really, nothing crazy. A little tighter than this one because I can't get it any tighter there. But now what we're going to do is we're going to start the motor. So we're going to plug this guy back in up here, and there we go. And we're going to let it run for just a couple seconds to make sure that nothing's ultimately too wrong before we've assembled everything again. Oh, and it is a good idea to replace these timing covers because this pulley is now resting against there, but don't worry, this pulley should grind down that plastic just nicely, kind of like what this harmonic balancer did. All right, mine started. I hope yours does too. So now it's time to get back to the radiator. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the old one, see what we got on there. We notice we have fans, and we have the coolant tank, the expansion tank, which I don't believe came with the new one. So we're going to pop that new one open and take a... Well, we appear to have a bit of an issue here. If you notice down there on this here, we do not have these, which looks to be for the automatic transmission, even though I did select manual transmission. I just looked at my order. After thinking some thoughts, I remembered that these transmission oil cooler lines for the auto trans are kind of enclosed on their own. Unless you have lines hooked up to the trans from these aren't going to leak out, because the radiator fluid actually never comes in contact with the transmission. So I'm going to see if I can retrofit the fans and the expansion tank onto this automatic trans radiator, and if so, then we should be good. All right, so to get these expansion tanks, or the only expansion tank on here, off, what you have to do is remove these two bolts here, which I think are 10mm, and then the fans, you're going to do more of the same. Remove the fan bolts, which they look horrible on mine. Hopefully they're not as bad as on yours. and you pull up these fans, much like you pulled up the radiator from the frame, is you pull up these fans this way, that way. Once those bolts are off, they all come off, and then you throw them back onto here, here, and here, and then bolt it to their respective areas. Well, just as expected, everything does fit perfectly on this Autotrans radiator, which is pretty cool. Good to know that you could use one. So yeah, you could spend a couple extra cents and buy yourself some new hardware here, but then people would know you're running some aftermarket stuff, and let's be real, keep them thinking it's stock. All right, so now what we're going to do, the last things, is move the radiator support things, which you just pop these off, 2 hands. It's easier, they're plastic. Well, okay, 1 hand was pretty easy. And you pop them on the top of the radiator, there and there, just like you took it off. And then we're going to pop it back in the car. All right, once you got the new one in, you'll find it doesn't quite fit like OEM. This is the Ultra Power I got from Rock Auto, by the way. And being that it is an automatic transmission, I'm going to let it slide. Like this fan shroud doesn't really go into the radiator all the way once it's tightened down. And these coolant lines are obviously not routed the exact right way, or this coolant line per se. Not a big deal, good enough for me. $900 car, so but as long as it cools and does the job, the aesthetics are secondary for me anyhow. But what we're going to do now is we're going to reconnect the top hose and the bottom hose, as you saw before, fill it up with coolant and pressure test it. And that's not a fully necessary step, it just saves you a lot of time. For me personally, I'd rather save the time than to go back and figure it out once it's hot and leaking. So let's pop everything back on and then start it up and see what's going on. So when you're tightening the hose underneath, don't forget to put your fans back in, 2 plugs, simple as that. And when you tighten these down, don't crank them crazy, because this is plastic. Don't forget that you can snap the plastic easily if you over tighten these clamps. So just go until it feels like it's not too tight, kind of screwdriver tight. I don't use a socket on them, I just use a screwdriver. This one actually has that fitment as you saw before, so just hand tight is perfect for these guys. And now I'm going to throw this cover back on here, pressurize the system, and see if there's any leaks. All right, so what I'm doing now is just pressure testing it, just about 7 psi, nothing crazy. Make sure there's no air leaking out. I usually let these sit for about 5 minutes and then come back and check the gauge. Right now I don't hear any hissing, which is great. And for about the 2 minutes that this has been on, needle has not moved. So really, these tools are awesome. If you want, I think they're like 50 bucks at Harbor Freight. Pick yourself a setup. They pick yourself a set. Pick up a set for yourself. We'll go with that one. They're great for diagnosing, great for making sure that you don't have any leaks in your cooling system, especially before you go and add coolant that you just paid money for, and then watching it leak out obviously is never good. So I'm gonna let that guy sit for just a couple more minutes, and then while that's done, I gotta change the oil. Link in the description if you want to learn how to change the oil on your Forester. Just because the needle did get hot, take a look at this picture. You can clearly see that's a little less than ideal, and when your oil is that hot, the viscosity does get changed of it. So you don't want to be running super thin oil, which I imagine is what's going to come out of here, because it was hot for who knows exactly how long. And it's just it's cheap enough insurance that you won't hopefully do any further damage if you overheated it as badly as I did. Okay, I apologize for the poor lighting because it got dark out while I was changing the oil. What you're going to want to do next is you're going to want to fill up the radiator, and you're going to want to do that while the car is running. So turn the car on, let it run as you're filling in the coolant, and put your heat on high, and let's just make sure that the coolant is just kind of about at this level here, coming up to the cap. Some might pour over, some might not, and you're just going to watch for air bubbles coming out of the system. Little bits might be still evident towards the end, and that's okay. As long as your temperature gauge is cool, and your temperature gauge is cool, like in the middle where it should be after it's been running for a while, and your heat's warm. Sometimes you might find that the heat will not be there until you shut the car off, let it cool down, come back, turn the car on, get it up to operating temp. For some reason, I guess the temperature change helps push the coolant along properly. But after that, that's it. If you've gotten this far and you've replaced it and you've bled it, congratulations. Thank you so much for watching. Share it with a friend if you might share it with a friend if you think that's going to be helpful for them. hit the like button if you liked it, down if you didn't, and let me know why, or leave a comment, or let me know how it helped you, because that would be helpful for me as well. So subscribe if you can, and thank you so much for watching, and remember, as always, keep it Val.